Well, hey, welcome back to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with Steve and James. This is the channel where we love to have long conversations about the movies you love. And it would really help us out if you haven't already subscribed to just subscribe and ding that bell so you never ever miss a video. And we really love talking film. So if you have a comment, if you have a viewpoint, there's something you agree with, disagree with, please put it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. James, what are we looking at today?
This week we're looking at Ridley Scott's House of Gucci. So this is the sort of saga of the Gucci family, the Italian fashion house, particularly the story of Patrizia Reggiani, as portrayed by Lady Gaga, and how she infiltrated this boutique company and sought to essentially take it over. There's an all-star cast, and also this is like Ridley Scott's second film in as many months after the last duel, and yeah, it's like a classic Italian crime saga with some style.
Yeah.
So, Steve, why don't you give me your initial thoughts? What did you think of this one?
Wow. James, I think I was mentioning to you earlier, I really love coming into this not knowing at all what you think about this. So I'm coming in fresh. I went into House of Gucci really, I mean, it's Ridley Scott. Come on. I'm going, this is going to be great storytelling. It's going to be great visually. We're going to get a peek behind that secret high-end fashion world of Gucci. We've got Adam Driver. We got Lady Gaga. We got Al Pacino. We got Jared Leto. We got Jeremy Irons. Sign me up. I'm ready to ride this ride. And then walked out going, oh, there's 2.5 hours I'm not getting back again. And it's not that this movie misses on every level. It's Ridley Scott, and it's an amazing cast that knows their craft. So there are moments in this movie, particularly towards the end, where I thought, okay, this is why I'm here. This is what's interesting. But and I'm sure we'll talk about it. This movie is too long. It's clocks in, I think, over 2.5 hours. It's at least 2.5 hours. And I'm starting to think that directors need to have like an act of Congress or an act of Parliament in case of the UK over there. Not that you're in the UK. For movies over 2 hours, because this movie it's not interesting enough to be over 2 hours. And the whole excitement I got that we're going to get into a little bit of the sleazy, glitzy, high-end world of fashion, a peek into the world of Gucci. And when I got to have that peek, it wasn't that interesting. And it took, I think, 45 minutes before I think they had a baby. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, this is just clocking in with every minute detail that it's not driving this story. And when it finally starts to get into the murder and the buyouts and the infighting, you're in the last 25 minutes of the movie. Right. And I'm just thinking, okay, now it's getting good. And then the movie was over. So the pacing for me was completely off. Anyhow, those are my initial thoughts.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna come straight back at you and ask you a question. How familiar were you with the story of Patrizia and Maurizio and what happened?
Vaguely. I remember the murder, but I wouldn't have been able to identify key characters 20 years out. I had to do a quick Wikipedia, familiarize myself with the story a bit. And but to answer your question, I was not really that familiar with it.
Yeah, no, I think I knew hardly anything. Mm-hmm. I think it was only really in the lead up to the film where I heard that it was essentially about the wife plotting the murder of the husband. And I was like, did I know that? I think I knew that. Anyway, I guess I know it now. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it does seem like the 90s was a dangerous time to be a fashion designer.
Yeah, indeed.
Like, Gucci gets murdered, and then a couple of years later, Gianni Versace gets murdered. Maybe one inspired the other. I don't think so, but it was a dangerous time. So I came into this one, very, very open-minded. I didn't bring anything to it really, but I was hoping for a bit of, sort of sensationalist kind of cheese. Really.
Yes.
And I think the trailer does a very good job of selling it as a, sort of a big sort of cheesy epic of excess, if you
Yes,
like.
and all the cheese was in the trailer because there wasn't that much cheese in the film, I thought.
Yeah, that was one thing that definitely surprised me, is that the film wasn't as funny or hammy,
Hmm.
or as camp, I suppose is the word, as the trailer sold it to be. Because
Hmm.
that, beyond really Jared Leto's character,
Yes.
who does this sort of, ridiculously kind of over the top performance, unrecognizable under mountains of latex. And Lady Gaga is clearly, very very aware of the fact that she has to be this kind of sort of monstrous personality, but
Right.
ground her in some kind of reality. It kind of could have gone either way, and I mean, I've got to be honest. I think I definitely liked it more than you did. I did
Okay.
like it.
Hmm.
I think I came away thinking that felt to me like The Godfather as rewritten as a daytime soap opera,
Hmm.
something like that. There was a kind of sort of trashiness to it that I enjoyed. I felt it could have gone further with it.
Right.
You've got that. It's the 80s. The majority of the film takes place in the 80s, which was such a ridiculous time for fashion. It
Yes.
was
Yeah.
kind of this nadir, if you like, but it was the rough ground that all of these fashion houses had to ride through in order to kind of then reinvent themselves in the 90s and for the 21st century. So there's an opportunity there to go all out with the hair and the shoulder pads and the music and
Hmm.
the tackiness of it all. And I felt that it was quite restrained in
Hmm.
its depiction of that period, which was quite surprising, actually.
Well, that's for me. It wasn't sure what kind of movie it wanted to be because it was somewhat campy, but not campy enough that you could say, okay, that's what they're going to do as a camp style. It wasn't enough crime nor enough that you think, okay, this is going to center around a murder. It wasn't enough drama
Mm.
because it just the too much of that camp and occasional comedic performances would be in there. So it really I just kept thinking this would have been much more interesting to watch as a true crime episode on some true crime show because I know that there's a really cool story in here. I just
Right.
didn't see it in this movie.
Yeah, or even just as a mini series,
Hmm.
or sort
Hmm.
of even a sort of made for TV miniseries, which has that kind of element of sort of campiness to it as well.
Right, right,
They always feel a bit sort of cheap. Like
right,
they've been made a little under budget, and
yeah,
and the acting isn't always as good as it might need to be.
right.
And I think an opportunity, I think, to lean into that. I mean, you look at some of sort of Scorsese's movies, and I think I was reminded repeatedly of Goodfellas and The Wolf of Wall Street, which are
Hmm.
both films about excess
Yes.
and about sort of indulgence, and they lean hard into comedy in those moments. I mean,
Hmm.
Goodfellas, yeah, it's a gangster movie and quite a violent one at that, but there are many moments of real humor in that film.
Joe Pesci can mix ap- absolute violence and comedic humor at the same time.
Yeah, and it's terrifying when he does,
He
because
does.
he
You
gets you
you you
laughing.
you smiling? You laughing at me? You
Yeah,
think I'm funny? You
funny,
think I'm a
funny
clown?
how.
You think I'm a
Exactly.
clown?
Exactly, and then he turns it on you, and yeah, it's terrifying. And I think you're right. I think this one lacked the sharp edges. It lacked the spice. I don't know whether it's something to do with Ridley Scott as a filmmaker, who is a filmmaker that I love,
Hmm.
but was he the best choice for this? He got the sense of place. All of those Italian locations were absolutely gorgeous. Whether it's in Milan or whether it's out on that Tuscan farm or whatever.
The villa shots were quite nice. Yeah.
All of that stuff was done really well. But did he know the period? I mean, he's an
Hmm.
old guy. He's in his 80s, so he should have been, in his prime in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
That's what 30 odd years ago. But maybe he was already a bit old and a bit out of touch then. I don't think he represented or recognized that the 80s lives or dies by its bad fashion choices.
And its success.
Yeah,
There wasn't rampant drug use in this
right.
movie, but it was the
Yeah,
80s and they were
where was the
Gucci's.
rampant? Where was all the coke?
Where
Where
was
was
all
all
the
the
sex,
coke?
drugs, and rock and roll? This is the behind the scenes, the Gucci. And it's kind of inferred that these things are going on.
Yeah,
But even Adam Driver's character, Maurizio, is it Maurizio?
Mauricio. Yeah.
He even admits at one point, from my German mother's side, I'm kind of a little boring. He got the logic mind. So you've got this passionate wife who's all emotion. She flies off. She's given to emotions of the moment. Coming against this, I kept feeling this German who's just seeing things logically. And Adam Driver's a wonderful actor, and I love him in so many movies. But I just found this character wooden and boring and not particularly fun to watch.
He's definitely boring,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's kind of part of what made him an outsider within the Gucci family.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in order to portray that well, you need to really show how excessive
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the Gucci family are.
And they did show that to a degree.
I think kind of part of the problem is that he doesn't have lots of siblings around the same age who are going crazy to juxtapose against him. I kept being reminded of Succession, the HBO show Succession, all through this, where it's starting from the same place, but that is a show again really blackly humorous, really lots of black humor all the way through it, and the best part of that show are the family members going at each other.
Yeah.
Particularly the brothers and sisters going at each other all day long, non-stop. And it's not like they're even vying specifically for control of the company or anything like that. They're just kind of spoiled brats.
Yeah.
Needling one another.
Well, and you drew the comparison, and it's easy to do because we have Pacino in this movie to The Godfather, and in The Godfather you have the three sons, and also the daughter, but you have, you got Sonny, who's this emotional, violent tank. You've got Freddie, who's the incompetent, lovable mommy's boy, and then you've got Michael, who the quiet, the guy who's thinking everything logically through, and you're able, like you said, to juxtapose these wildly varying personality types against one another within the same family. And like you said, the Gucci family just doesn't allow for that because there is no siblings.
Yeah, and I'm the only person of anything close to his generation is Paolo.
Is
Jared Leto's character, who's portrayed as significantly older. Mm-hmm. You get the impression that they're not of the same age, barely the same generation. But he's a joke.
Yes,
he's this complete clown with no style, no talent, but that nobody takes seriously, and so therefore nobody is going to point to him, least of all Patrizia, Lady Gaga's character, and go, that's what I want.
Right.
That's the lifestyle that I want. What I think the film lacks is you get her kind of hunger, but there is no real representation of that aspirational lifestyle that she craves so desperately.
Well, and that brings up a point. I never get the feeling. I mean, obviously she's a real character, so she had this Lady Macbeth nature to her.
Sure.
But the way the film positions it is this real lovey-dovey couple at the beginning, and she's working diligently for her father's business. She seems like the ideal woman, and we're never given any kind of story cue that she has this hidden nature that needs to be cultivated. It's like suddenly about halfway through the movie, Ridley Scott or the screenwriters just say, oh, that's right, she's a murderess. We've got to now start having her act in a Lady Macbeth fashion. And there's no indicator why she suddenly starts acting this way. I mean, we can kind of infer a little bit that she's getting caught up in certain things, but as the viewer, I'm just seeing this sweet little couple who I've been kind of groomed. I've been groomed to feel this compassion for this couple who he's willing to put his fortune aside for true love. And she's going to bring him into the family truck business, and everybody's happy and content. And now suddenly, okay, now we have to go in this direction suddenly with no rationale for it.
Okay. I mean, I don't think I quite trusted her as much as you did. I think I think that she was motivated by Maurizio's lack of motivation.
Hmm.
I think you see it that when they first meet each other, she's instantly attracted to him before she realizes who he is.
Right.
But then he introduces himself pretty quickly, and she's like, "Oh, big
Hmm.
fish."
Yeah.
Okay. And the way I took it is that yes, although she knows what her roots are, and she knows it's probably going to be difficult to convince Rodolfo, Jeremy
Hmm.
Irons' character, to accept her in, and she makes these sort of big blunders over the art and
Yeah.
various
Yeah.
other things early on. But I think from her point of view, she's like, well, just reel him in,
Hmm.
get that ring on your finger.
Get a baby. Get a baby.
Get a baby, and so you've got him locked in,
Hmm.
and then you can, then all you need to do is convince him, find a way to push him back into the business, and as soon as you've done that, you're in, and you're going to have a piece of this for the rest of your life. And so I was kind of convinced that it was, the most cynical way of putting it would be the long con. I think there was genuine love there, but I think that very quickly that was eroded and then replaced with her sort of desperation and her greed. And she was going to do, obviously, whatever it took to secure what she felt was hers.
Well, should we chat about the cast? I'm just
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think that's really the biggest single element of this film.
And it's an A-star cast.
Well, yeah, so I was going to say, how did they land for you?
There was hit and misses. I thought the performances, Lady Gaga's already getting a lot of praise for her role, and she genuinely is a really good actress. I think I'm just watching her and thinking, while I was watching her performance, thinking, is this somebody like a Madonna who's trying to make the crossover and will kind of hit or miss occasionally? I think she's a much better actress than Madonna. And I think she could have easily a career in acting just as strong as she has in her musical career. So I found her performance fantastic. I thought Jared Leto and Al Pacino were too bumbling and too. I thought they played their roles well, but I will say Pacino's moment, he had his Godfather 3 moment where I was reminded of how good he is in The Godfather. When Paolo tells him that he sold his shares, and you see Al Pacino went into that same mode he went into at the end of Godfather 3 when he saw his daughter shot. It's a pain. You've just broken not only my heart but my spirit, my will to live.
Oh yeah, I mean, and Al Pacino is the man you go to.
Yeah.
For moments like that. I mean, I think that Al Pacino and Jared Leto, they were giving these big performances. But Al Pacino, we know that he's been doing these for a while now. I reckon since the 90s he's been probably since Sense of a Woman. Scent of a Woman, when he finally won an Oscar, he was like, "Oh, this is what you want from me. Okay, I'll go big," and he's never come down again. And Jared Leto, I think his performance is, for want of a better word, it's quite extraordinary. Because on the one hand, you look at everything else in the film, and everybody else is immaculately turned out and doing a very, for the most part, something very restrained, something very measured. And you're looking at him, and the first question you ask yourselves is, why did Ridley Scott make the decision to do this? Why did he not hire somebody 10 years older who didn't need to wear all this makeup? It's such a weird roll of the dice,
right,
in a film that is otherwise so precise in how it's staged that that it's such a gamble.
Yeah.
But I really, it was my favorite single thing in the movie was what Jared Leto was doing. I do not like Jared Leto as a rule.
Okay.
Yeah, he's been all over the place for me, and occasionally he can be a good actor. But certainly in recent years, since he won an Oscar, I think it's got the better of him, and I found him quite interminable. on screen actually, and I think maybe part of what I liked about his performance here is that it doesn't look like him, and so you're not kind of looking at Jared Leto. You're looking at someone completely unrecognizable, somebody new, essentially.
Until you look into his eyes.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah. There's something.
there's this foreign face, and then there's two Jared Leto eyes in there,
Mm,
buried under all this prosthetic. And when you look at it, I'm thinking, wow, that really is Jared Leto in there.
yeah, and there isn't really a moment when the makeup fails or anything like that.
No, no.
Oftentimes, it's a beautiful
Hmm.
job. It's brilliantly done, and it's such a crazy out there performance.
Hmm.
And I've seen that it's actually upset some of the people who are still alive who knew Paolo Gucci and said no, he wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, I don't care. This is a movie, that's fine. But it's so sort of what I was going to say is Al Pacino and Jared Leto are in the movie that I wanted this movie to be.
Okay.
They're the ones swinging for the fences
Yeah.
every second that they're on screen and doing it as big as possible and going nuts with it. And I think it's the rest of the movie that's just treading a little carefully.
I really agree with you there, James. I wanted to follow those two back to their house and see all the craziness, because that I'm going to see the House of Gucci that I really came to see. I want to see crazy, weird stuff, and all I'm getting in Adam Driver and Lady Gaga's house is little chit chat, her occasional outburst, his tempered responses. And you get that for 45 minutes. And I'm
Mm.
starting to look at my watch going, okay, what's happening here?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And so I think tonally throughout the movie, uh, it can never quite decide what movie it is and what type of movie it is. And I think that's the biggest problem at the end, and especially when it is as long as it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's asking so much of you without really meeting you halfway.
Yeah.
It's just going sit there and listen and watch this movie, but it's not giving you the hits, as it
Mm-hmm.
were. I think it's coming at it from. I think it's a far more sort of measured and sort of actually, dare I say, sort of classy and restrained affair than than I wanted it to be. Really.
Yeah. You wanted a little more trash in it.
Yeah,
And there's no trash. It's pretty tame.
well, I think it's because. And I guess maybe this is just a reflection on the actual House of Gucci as much as anything else, is that the family wasn't this family of deranged misfits who led excessive lives and tore it up wherever they went, because there weren't, as it portrays, there weren't many of them, and
Right.
a lot of them were pretty old. It might have been more interesting. Well, I don't think it was, because I was going to say it might have been more interesting following the two brothers when they were younger, when they were building it up. But I don't think it was. I think it was
Right.
always this very sort of small boutique kind of leather goods establishment, and it was only in the wake, really, of all of this
Yeah.
that we see
Yeah.
that it sort of exploded into a big thing.
Well, that's where the movie got interesting for me when the business started to tank a little bit, and they bring in InvestCorp and they bring in their Middle East partners, and that was some of the best dialogue across the table. And I remember thinking at that point how poor the dialogue seemed prior to that. And when they finally got there, I was thinking, oh, now the movie is getting interesting. We're getting into some of the shenanigans that go on with shares and who owns what shares and who's going to buy out who and who's backstabbing, who's double dealing. That gives me a little bit more, not that I'm an advocate of people acting like that, but if I'm going to watch something, that is much more interesting to watch. And I thought some of the back and forth discussions, when he gives him the one of a kind shoe, and then Al Pacino recognizes, you didn't buy that shoe in London. I know where you got that shoe. That's the kind of thing I find interesting to watch. And the movie has moments of that, but it's not consistent enough for me to give it a higher rating. Hey, everybody, we just had a little bit of a technical issue. We're having to switch mics with James. So if there's a little bit of change, we apologize for that. We'll get it fixed in the next episode. Well, James, because of that technical issue, we're going to kind of give some final thoughts and then the final score. What are your final thoughts on House of Gucci? What do you think of that?
Okay, I mean, it's not a disaster. You know, you said you came out of it feeling like you'd really kind of wasted your time. I didn't have that much of a problem with it. I enjoyed some of the performances, and I enjoyed a lot of the locations. And as I said, it was a story that I sort of, for the most part, didn't know, and was quite absorbed in it while it was on. But then you came out of it going, okay, I'm a little underwhelmed with the execution. You know, like we've said, I liked some of the bits and I liked some of the performances, and there was a suggestion of, you know, high camp ham and cheese excess
Mm-hmm.
that I wish, you know, in hindsight, that I wish that the film had been.
Right.
And I felt that ultimately the film came away just a bit staid, a bit dry, just a bit cautious. I
Mm-hmm.
think, you know, I would have loved to have spent more time with the trial. You know, you get to her arrest, and that's basically the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then it just cuts to her being sentenced. Um, Maybe it was an incredibly boring trial, but I think, you know, you could have justified another sort of 10 minutes of screen time at least, just going through all of that. And, you know, how did she fare in prison?
I feel the same way. Let me just jump in there for a second.
Sure.
I thought we're going to have a lot more of the true crimeness of this. You know, what's the rest of the world thinking? What is the fashion world thinking? This is the 90s. What's the viewpoints? What's the scandal? We get none of that in this. It pretty much goes to the hitman, to a quick trial scene, to end taglines telling us what happened, you know, afterwards. And it's like they spent way too much time focusing in on the mundane. And then
Mhm.
just when it gets exciting, they think, oh, well, that's it.
Well, this is it. I mean, especially her relationship with Salma Hayek's character, you know,
Mhm.
the medium who sort of advises her on all of her decisions, you know, which become increasingly poor choices, increasingly ridiculous, and then is complicit in the murder. The fact that there are, you know, she's not the only one who is sentenced. There's like four of them uh,
You
in
know
the
what's
end,
interesting?
and there's no dynamic about how they responded to all of that,
Right.
you know, and then the fallout of these other people being involved, being dragged down with her. You know, I really felt there was an opportunity for like a final, you know, a coda or
Hmm.
an epilogue, or even a whole final act there. The film just kind of, you know, it just decides it's had enough, and it ends.
That's it. You know, I was actually thinking at some point until Salma Hayek actually is involved with the contracting of the hitman, that she was actually a Gollum type character, like from Lord of the Rings, because it seemed like Patrizia was always having these like internal dialogues with her. And I was starting to wonder whether she was a real character or whether she was being used as a tool, almost like Gollum, of a split
Mm,
personality, somebody who's feeding, you know, the ego. And then I realized when we got to the end of the movie, I thought, oh no, she's a real character, and that she
yeah.
got sentenced. Okay, there went that theory. But yeah, I totally agree. That's kind of my final thoughts, is that the two areas I would have found much more interesting is all the business shenanigans that happened with the shares and the brothers, and then Investco coming in. That for me is when the movie actually started to find its traction, and you're already at the end of the movie, and then they go right into the murder. And the interesting parts of this is really crowbarred into the last 30 minutes, and the
Mm.
first hour and 45 minutes is a lot of family interaction that frankly is just not interesting enough to justify the 2.5 hours. So what would be your final score? What do you think?
Well, it's funny because I think I think I came into this episode liking it more than I now do. I think you've kind of talked me down a little bit, and it's for good reason. You know, I think I was willing just to kind of take it on face value, but I think giving it, you know, a bit more
Mhm.
analysis and thought, you know, you're right. It did fail, you know, in some key areas, failed to deliver on expectations. So I'm going to give it three handcrafted, unique Gucci shoes out of five.
Okay,
But
I'm going to give it two unique
okay,
handcrafted. It's not a complete miss, but I really can't recommend. You don't need to see this movie.
right, yeah, no, I think and I never thought I would say these words. I think Jared Leto makes it worth watching.
There. Words to live by there. All right. Well, I'll see you next week, James. We'll welcome everybody back to Deep Dive New. Have to do that a little bit better. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Nah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I was just going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Well, great. That ends our episode where we review The House of Gucci. Join us again next week where we have The Last Dispatch. Yes?
Or The French Dispatch?
Was it The French Dispatch? Oh. I'll know more.
But you're breaking with precedent here by disclosing what we're going to do next time, and therefore locking us in.
Oh,
what
that's
we're
true.
Do next time.
That's true.
Maybe I'll just shy away from commitment.
Okay, we'll see you. We'll see you next week with whatever movie we choose to do. We'll see you then.
Yeah, exactly. You'll just have to come back and find out whatever it is. But it'll be good, or it won't.
That's right. Or it won't.
We might agree, and we might not.
Could be shite. Let us know in the comments.
Exactly.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.